residential project. And when you open up the landscape model, you'll see it's missing a house. There's no house. But nobody wants to live on a lot with no house. So let's open up the architecture model. Downloads. I noted in this one that the architecture model is not aligned. Oftentimes an architect is not going to build their house at the appropriate elevation. Most architects like to build their houses at, say, something like elevation 100, and then everything is up or minus from there. So you set the finished floor elevation, the FFE, together, and then go from there. Wow, it's really annoying, all these stupid pop-up windows. And then my program just cancels. That's annoying. Open. Open desktop, downloads. Where do I find downloads? Oh, what's the program? Okay. Who knew it would take this long just to open files? So how many of you here feel pretty competent in, or who doesn't feel necessarily extremely competent in AutoCAD? Sweet. So it's okay to raise your hand. When I started at I did not learn AutoCAD at all in grad school. So when I started in Office, I had no legit, I could barely open programs. So I learned it pretty quick. It's a nice program, pretty easy overall, which you all know. Now let's see if this model will open for us. Have you guys had any problems opening all the files? Everybody else have everything open?
Can you open more than one file in Rhino at a single time, at a time?
Yeah, you can. What it'll actually do is open up the software twice. It's different than, like, it won't give you a tab, like in Photoshop or even in AutoCAD. It actually opens up Rhino twice. So if you are in a file and you say open, it'll close down the file you're working on. So you actually have to go to that file and separately open it up. All right, while that's opening up, we can start to look at the CAD file. Really? Maybe you're not going to get any architecture. In the CAD file, you know, I could talk about CAD for a long time, but there are a couple of things we just want to review very quickly in CAD. Number one, just being layer management. If you type layers, it's going to pull up your layer menu, layer properties manager. I always like to dock my things, so just a quick thing. You right click on that and you allow docking. It's allowed to be docking, and I anchor it right. Now it just sits over here, and when I hover over it, it pops up. It's just nice when you only have one window to look at everything. Same thing I'm going to do for properties, so type properties. And I'm going to right click over here. It says allow docking. I'm going to anchor it left. So I go over here. These are really the only two things I need to care about for this document. Usually I'll have XREF open, but not necessary for this. If I look at layer properties and I expand this a little bit, you'll see that there are a lot of layers in here. That's in large part because there are some XREFs that are not existing. So these XREFs, the architecture XREF and the survey XREF, the file is like, hey, where are they at? I didn't bring them over. It wasn't necessary for this class. But it definitely muddies up sort of the layers. You can't always click on all used layers, but it also includes, it grays out the ones that we're not seeing. Landscape layers always start with the letter L. And most architecture layers start with the letter A. But different offices do it different. And then there's usually a very generic set of layers that already come into a file. Most standards are that you have L dash and then a 4-letter terminology followed by another 4-letter description, and then kind of beyond there you can write whatever you want. But the things that you'll see in this drawing are going to be things like, in this case, if I select a layer, it's always going to show me up here what layer it's on. I can always go to the properties and see what layer it's on and what kind of a line it is. In this case, it's a polyline. So this is on L-site building. Another thing about L-site building that you'll want to look at is that because we do work in the real world, there are elevations, etc. This file, or this layer, is currently set to 0 as an elevation. If I select any of these layers, they should all have an elevation of 0. That's correct. But I could set a 3D Z value for them. And I'll show you why that's important in a little bit. If you zoom in, you will see that there are some spot elevations in here. There's a block. That is to say, I can copy it. It'll have attributes that are you can copy around. It's on the layer L-ano, spot grading. We've got some text in here. You know, say I type text and I write some text. Whoops, text. Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, wow, that doesn't match this text at all. That's just because the CAD settings for writing text are this. I can always match the properties of another text by saying MA or match properties, selecting that text, and then selecting that text, and it matches properties. These are just little quick things that I highly recommend if you open up a file and you're like, oh, that's messy. We've got this layer. This is on L-pave edge. We've got this yellow layer is L-site feature. We've got some trees in here. All these trees are grouped. They're actually currently an array. It's the easiest way to kind of like create an LA is to array the trees in a number of different directions. At any point, you can explode those. This is a block also, this tree. That's to say two little circles are linked together to create a block. And in general, it's pretty self-explanatory. We've got some sidewalk lines, and we've got L-pave, curb, back of face, etc. So, what I want to care about right now, let's see, I gotta try to open up that architecture model one more time. Let's see if it'll let me. Downloads. Maybe if I move it to the desktop. Zoom. But in the real world, north is actually over here. So I actually created a special UCS for this file in order to work in an orthogonal direction. Now you can always Google that. You can ask me, we can go through how to do that maybe some other time, but not today. And it's really important to do that because when you start to move those layers into Rhino, then they'll be orthogonal to the 0, 0 of Rhino. You can set up a different construction plane around it. You can do a lot of different ways. You can say, well, Jonathan, that means north arrow is not going to be right in Rhino. That's true too, but you can change the north arrow in Rhino. This is just the way I do it. So, because I like to have a construction plane that's usually orthogonal, and my firm doesn't use any curvy lines, so it's that much easier. So I'm going to select my architecture base. I'm going to type W block. Hit enter. Okay, what comes up? It says, well, where am I sending this? I'm going to send this to the desktop because that's where it's easy. I'm going to just call it house elevation. It is notable that the AutoCAD drawing type, I think 2013 might not work. Rhino only works with AutoCAD versions or DW versions of an older nature. I know it'll work if it's AutoCAD 2010, so I'm just going to change it to 2010. If you're having issues importing line work, there's a good chance it's because it was saved at a different DWG setting. So hit save. Note that the insert units are inches. That's fine. Okay, now I'm going to go over here into my architecture model, and everybody just type 0, comma, or type P out, or polyline. You have to type the word polyline. I'll explain why in a second. And now, type 0, comma 0, comma 0, and hit enter. And what we're doing is we're drawing a polyline with the station point starting at 0, 0, 0. So you can see that the architecture model is set at 0, 0, 0. It's anchored at that point, right? Now, I could draw straight up. I could turn my ortho on and draw a line straight up and say 302.5 feet. And that's going to be the elevation that we're actually we'll be working at. Now, I've already imported this base. I'm going to delete it really quick because I want to re-import it now. I'm going to type import. I'm going to find that W block I just created, that DWG, which I saved on my desktop, and I called it house elevation. I'm going to say open. And a really important thing to note is when I import it, I need to make sure that these two things match up. So my layout units, I want to switch to inches. I hope this works. Yep, it did. So I was working in inches. The model was kind of confused. It said, hey, what are you working in? I'm not sure. Just make sure that those two things align. It's going to be pretty obvious if you import it wrong, because if it came in at millimeters, it wouldn't have been anywhere near the right size. Okay, so I now want to move my architecture up to this base, because now anytime I bring something in from this model, it'll be in the perfect right spot, more or less. Really quick, I'm just going to select this all. I'm going to type W block. And the objects on unlocked layers will be included. That's fine, I don't care. Put it on the desktop. Full set. Desktop. Hit OK. I'm going to import all that. Let's just see what that looks like. Full set. Change that to inches. Make sure they're coming out the same. Hit OK. Okay. So all my line work came in down here, except for a couple of other things that did have Z values. And that's okay. We'll figure out, there's a way to work. The workflow that we will use, actually, usually you want everything to come in at 0. And what you do is you project the line work up onto your topography. You project things from 0 up to where they're supposed to be, unless you want them to come in with that elevation set. So, for instance, spot elevations, you might want to already have those things set. In this instance, we wanted the architecture base to be set. I'm going to delete all this extra junk except for the house base. As in a lot of programs, selection windows in Rhino, if you go left hand to right, it only selects what you circle. As I say, it didn't select all that junk. If I go right to left, it selects everything. If I hold Control and do a crossing window, it unselects things. Okay, hit delete. I don't need that junk. Also, if I go in here and I select that line, because I imported that line, I had that line in there twice now, it's going to say, hey, there's two different lines. I can delete one of those lines. No big deal. Okay, our architecture's down here. It is, I'm having some orbiting errors right now because I zoomed up here. The best way to reset my orbiting is to select something and then do zoom selected, which we reviewed last week. You can also type Z, spacebar, S, spacebar. That gets you to zoom selected. But I like this handy dandy little tool, magnifying glass with 2 yellow circles. Now our orbiting is orbiting around the architecture. All right, I'm going to just select this entire model. And if you look at the layers, there's a lot of kind of layer things happening. It's fairly well organized. But I'm going to type group. I actually use groups a lot in both AutoCAD and in Rhino. It's important to note because some people don't. If you, like other people, don't ever group things in AutoCAD. So if you open it up and you're just like, why are these line work grouped? It's not even, I'll open up files where somebody groups something and I can't figure it out. I'm super frustrated because nobody else does it that way, and so I don't expect that. Now I know that this is the point right down here. This corner is what I want to align with this corner. So I need to turn on a way to connect those two things. And the way to do that is by turning my O-snaps on. Down at the bottom, I click O-snap, which is grid, snap, ortho, planar, and the fourth one over is O-snap. I'm going to select, I can select a bunch of these because because they tell you before when you're snapping to things. Like if it says near, it'll tell you near. And in this case, I want to turn vertex on for sure. In order to move it, I just type the letter M, and that incites the move command. I go to my corner, I grab it, and I pull it up here, and I snap it out right there. Do some inspection. Let's see, does it look like it aligned right? I'm going to reset my zoom selected because I want my ortho to be, or my orbiting to work correctly. So I'm going to zoom select to it again. Nice. Now my zoom isn't over zooming. It's appropriately scaled to what I'm working with. Okay. I can inspect that line work, make sure it's hitting the spot correctly. Okay, that looks pretty good.
How do you pan while you're signing a grading or something?
You hold Shift. Shift, and then the right mouse button allows you to pan. Right mouse button just orbits, but Shift allows you to pan. Now, I'm going to zoom in, and I actually have a little bit of a mistake. I snapped to the bottom of the foundation. We pay a lot for our transitions in my office, so we can have no thresholds. It's very expensive for this because you have to have slot drains all the way around the house in case the water doesn't back up into the house. But that's how we like to roll. So we are going to actually move the architecture to be exactly flush with the exterior. Expensive detailing. And so I need to move that down. I'm going to move that down so the bottom of my windows actually perfectly aligns with that. This house, it actually has a basement with yoga windows that look into the swimming pool. There's a swimming pool here, and there's like a yoga room with windows that look into it, and an art gallery that looks into it. I mean, it's snaz. So you see a lot of this stuff. All right. Now we can get saved. That's all I care about. I just want the house to be in the right spot. There we go. Hit save. And then you can close the architecture model. Okay. Now let's open up let's take a look at the landscape model. Now, this has all been modeled in the exact right spot. Okay. So that is to say, this plane, if I type PL or polyline, oh, whoops. Okay, let's do something really quick. Let's set our shortcuts so they all match. Because it's one of the most maddening things about Rhino is that their shortcuts don't always align with what you get out of CAD. Okay, I type the letter PL and I think polyline. That's what I get out of AutoCAD. I want that to exactly match my Rhino so my brain doesn't have to like reinterpret. Things like the letter C in AutoCAD often incites the circle command. I hate that. I want it to incite copy command. Okay, little things like that. And then there's a number of shortcuts that we will use in this class because I do them all the time. Key ones being scaling things in one dimension, scaling things in two dimensions, etc. So the way you add shortcuts is through File. We went through this last week, but I don't believe everybody was here. We go File, Properties, and under Document Properties, there's a lot of information, but the one we care about is right under Rhino Options. Second one down is Aliases, and this is where you set your shortcuts. You can go in here and you type them. You can see all you have to do is a little apostrophe and then an underscore. And then you write whatever it is. Like, for instance, M is set to move. But you can always just import a text file. Now, on your week 3, there is an alias file. If you download that alias file, it's going to look like this. And then right-click and say Save as a text document to your desktop. Yeah. You do like more tongue exercises. Once you're in the document properties, you say import. You navigate to that text document. Whoops, I didn't say mine. Save as text document. Import text. It says, do you want to replace things? Yes, I want to override them. Say OK. Now we can see it imported all of these extra fancy dancy ones. We've got zoom extents for ZE, ZS is zoom selected. A big one that I love is S1 and S2 for scale 1D, scale 2D. Just a bunch of ones I love. Okay, hit OK. Now we're good to go. Type PL for polyline. Type 0, 0, 0. And you can see that our model is up here at 302.5 feet. Take my word for it. All right. We're talking about workflows, so the next thing to do is how do we put these models together? How do we create what is called a work session? Anybody guess what command we type? Work session? Rhino is a very dumb program. I talked a little bit about this last week, but I love it for its stupidity. It just does what you tell it. And if you don't tell it to do something, it doesn't do it. Follow the prompt commands. Work session. I type work session. It says, okay, sweet. What do you want to attach? I'm going to say attach. I'm going to go to my desktop where that architecture model is. I'm going to say open. It's got to think about it. It's got to think pretty hard. Yes. It can be open. It doesn't need to be closed, but I mean, it should be saved at you should have moved the architecture up to that base level. It's thinking really hard. So anyway, what's of note of this is that I'm actually, all the changes I'm making from now on will be in the landscape model Rhino file. Okay, I can still open up the landscape model Rhino file if that's what I choose to do, and the architecture won't show up. It's not linked to the landscape model Rhino file. It's linked via this kind of like cloud-based, whatever, it's not cloud-based, but you get the idea, work session. So if you want to see both, you have to open up the work session, but just know that you're always still working in the landscape model file. So I say close, that looks good. Yay, my model came in just at the right spot. Now, what can I do with that model? Well, I actually grouped it. So the group is remembered. It remembers that group there. If I look under layers and toggle everything down a little bit, pull down to where I can see all of my potential layers, then it comes down here. Let's make these names a little bit bigger. And it says, okay, that's the file that's linked. And everything's grayed out, but you can change the layer management. You can turn things on and off. You can't change them, but you can change their visibility, which is really handy. I can actually even just turn it off. Don't want to have to look at it. Just turn it off with the visibility. So, all right. Layers. Let's talk about layers and organization really quick. Try to knock this out in 10 minutes. So, what you will see from an organizational standpoint for me is, number one, the first layer. If you don't see layers, by the way, type layers, menu will pop up. You saw, I actually, you can always grab any of these boxes. Organization of Rhino is infinite. Last week the question was like, how do you import the similar options so that your window looks the same when you go from computer to computer? Long story is, I worked on it for like a half an hour this morning. I couldn't figure it out. I will put more time into it next week because I would love to know how to do that. But there are infinite possibilities, not only with the tools and there's multiple ways to name the tools and ways to get to them, but also ways to lay these things out. I always like to have a floating window as much as I can, so like for instance here, this floating window, if I close it and I type properties, it actually remembers what it was associated with previously, the layers and the display. It's smart enough to know like, oh, your previous setting was this, you closed it, you probably want all those things back. If you want to add anything, you just right click and get to it. But like CAD, property and layers are really important. I don't ever use display. I don't care about that. You can pull that off and delete it. I always add named views, and that's about it. Sometimes I'll add like named seaplanes, if that's an easy way to jump between construction planes. But let's go back to layers and check out the layers. In general, it's very important to work on a zero layer. That is to say, this little check mark will be checked. So anytime I draw a line, polyline, PL, whatever, it's on. If I go to my properties and look at it, it's on the zero layer. If I import things, so like let's import that line work, blah, 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 desktop, the house elevation, inches, it actually comes in on the layer that it was defined by in CAD. So it actually came in, you see the blue line there, on L-site building. Interesting, right? That's kind of really amazing. The only problem with that is that sometimes if you go into CAD and say you move that and re-imported it, it would combine both those lines on the same layer. It'll say, oh, you've already got a layer named L-site building. We're just going to put it back on that layer. So you use it to your advantage. Another important thing when you import things, if you want to find them or see them, is that they are current. That is to say, right now it's yellow, and at any time I wanted to isolate it, now is the best time. So the way to isolate it is best done with visibility, and then the tool that I emphasized last week, my favorite tools in Rhino, remember I only use like 10 tools in a program, is invert selection and isolate. Invert selection and hide objects. So it just selects everything else and turns it off and says, okay, this is all we got for you. Now I could work on it, I could do something, I could maybe extrude it, I could do lots of junk to it. If I want everything to come back, I just turn the light bulb back on. So there it is. All right. So zero layer only applies to things when you're working in the file. Imported layers always come in on the layer that they were named when they come in. I like to create these little dashed line marks. It means nothing. It's just visual graphic junk. First button creates a new layer. All I do is dash, 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 dash. It just helps me organize a lot. You can't have two layers that look exactly the same, so your dash numbers have to be different. Anyway, so that's all those things are. Then I'll have landscape, LA file, and then per the distinctions of the project, I'll usually break it down into things like front yard, backyard, pool base, pool options, driveway. I'll have a space. I'll have general sort of site conditions. In this case, the site conditions are the boulevard. One great way to select things, anytime you want to see what's on a layer, if you right-click and say select objects, it will select only those things on that layer. I can invert the selection and just check it out. Very handy. Sidewalk, same thing. Road, curb, property line. These are things that aren't going to change. They're just kind of like this base layer. I've got architecture. That's just like extra junk. Like in this case, I wanted to change the stair in the architecture, so I just have another layer for that. I have scale figures. Those are turned off, but I could right-click on them and say select objects. You can see how many scale figures I've got. I'm going to type Z spacebar E to zoom selected, or zoom extents. I'm sorry, Z spacebar S to zoom selected, and you can see here again all my scale figures. And then I've just got this kind of extra junk layer. You almost always need that. Line work options is a file that when I import all that line work, I move it into this folder so that when I import another set of line work, they don't overlap on the same layer. I was just saying that L-site building. So say I have two different design options from two different CAD files. Well, my pave edge file or layer name convention is going to be the same in both, but they're going to be different line work. I don't want them to import on the same layer. So it's important to move them to a sub-layer before you import the new line work. As we start modeling more, this becomes more apparent. All right, let's talk about options. An important thing in creating options to create like a swimming pool. So the whole assignment is to create something kind of like this, right? You got a swimming pool view, you got some scale figures in there, you've got a plan, there should be, I guess, some labels on there, and then you've got different options. So this one is a different pool than this. This one is a different pool than this. More options is to be kind of regimented with how you create new layers and making sure that essentially the first time you create them, they're set up pretty well and have textures apply, etc. So let's isolate. I don't think I have a lot of, I do have some, I have backyard options. All right. So let's look at, let's just look at the pool. That'll be the best way to do it. We've got pool, we've got bases, and then we've got actual pool options. Let's turn on, well, let's just talk about this for a second. So The pool bases, I'm going to turn all of these on. Select them. If I hold shift, I can select all the layers. I can right click and say select objects. Oh wait, I need to expand down because all I'm doing is selecting sort of the sub things. Right click, select objects. Invert. Now I can see all of those different bases. The only difference between these bases is I actually was looking at doing different sized swimming pools. So that is to say, a swimming pool of that size versus a skinnier swimming pool versus an even skinnier swimming pool. So what I've created in my base file is just water and wall. It's just a rectangle. I'm just going to isolate only base A. There's water, and in this case it was an infinity pool. So I just created a base with some walls, made it white. I actually offset the water an inch, just so it's always above it, to create that infinity edge effect, and then turn that on. So that's just my base for pool. And then what I can do is, within the interior of this, start to change the design of it. I can give it stairs in different locations. I can put a spa in a different location, etc. So let's look at some of those options. I'm going to toggle these back up. We're only going to be working in the base A. I'm going to turn everything else back on, and we're going to make another selection. Let's look at all of these options. So toggle them all down. Seems a little bit annoying because we just want to isolate them. But toggle them all down. I'm going to hold Control to select pool base, base A, water, wall, pool options, and then just select all the pool option layers. Okay, so just smart selections by holding Control. All the pool options. And now we're going to invert the selection and hide objects. Oh, why can't we see anything? Oh, I didn't select them, sorry. With those selected, I have to right click and say select objects. Okay, now invert selection. There we go. Okay, now let's deselect all those things. Let's go up here, and now we can turn things on and off within this selection. It's just a way to isolate things. Turn the water off, and we can see what we're working with. So all these different pool bases, I can twirl these up. There's some sub ones that describe each option a little bit more. But we're looking at option 1A. If I turn that on, it's just a Baja shelf. What's a Baja shelf? It's when you put like a little chaise lounge in there, and it's in like 2 inches of water. So it says to the client, yeah, what if you just get a Baja shelf? I don't know. Yeah, I think there's some Baja shelves in this design, like this one. This has a Baja shelf that goes into a spa. All right. Do you want a Baja shelf? Nah. I want a spa. So this is a big spa. This is like, this is the Jay-Z. This isn't even the Jay-Z spa. This is like a Coldplay spa. Sorry, I just have to make fun of them because of the Super Bowl. But anyway, so you got the spa here. You get the picture. I can do a Baja shelf with a littler spa. You can do stairs along the edge with a little bench. I can turn on invisible stairs. No, sorry, 60-inch stairs is what I call these. This is just a grand staircase. And so on and so forth. Stairs with a Baja shelf. And so you can see how these were all done on their own specific layers, okay? What's handy about that, of course, is being able to isolate them to then set up some renders, to export them out, and then put them into Photoshop and use all of the things we've been talking about. But, yes, and we'll go through that more here as quick as possible from the standpoint of like drawing them. I think setting up from the standpoint of creating these designs, doing it in CAD first gives you the ability to just design in CAD, which I prefer to do dimensionally, and then import that line work. But you can do it, Rhino, creating lines is exactly the same as in CAD, so you can do that in here too. I actually love to scale things in Rhino. It's really easy to do that. So if you get some things set right, you can just scale them up and down, like stairs, for example. You can just make them kind of longer, even if you know your tread ratio or riser ratio is correct. Then you can just pull them bigger or shorter, right? Things like that if you want to adjust. And we'll get more into that as we're modeling. But I just want to show you how to export things at this point. So we isolated these stairs, right? We used some visibility options to isolate them. Now, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's pick a named view that we're gonna like. So this is totally random at this point. It doesn't matter. I'm gonna say this is my named view 1. So I'm gonna go over here to named view. I got a bunch of ones I guess just saved from when I was working on this model. But I'm going to say save as and say pool or just P-1. I like that view. Now let's go and save a plan view. I'm going to change my viewport, or I'm sorry, my set view, the third tab over. It gives us all these different car options, right? And then we can set the view to the top view. Now we have no perspective. We're looking perfectly, dimensionally down on it. I can say save as and call this P-plan. Say OK. And one more perspective view. I'm going to turn that perspective view back on and toggle around. Actually, I'm not sure which pool end we're on right now because we haven't isolated anything. We don't have any stairs on. And I want to make sure to be looking at the stairs. So to get back to a view that I know referentially what's going on, I'm going to click on P-1, my P-1 named view. And now I know, okay, cool. I just want to move it around here. Let's pick a view, I don't know, like this. Yay, save as P-2. Sorry. Oh, my computer's mad at me for some reason. You can delete all the other views too, if they're getting in your way. P-2. Okay, so we've got all of our awesome pool views set up. And delete all these. Delete named views. Okay, we just got the 3 views we care about. Okay. Let's go back to our layers. Now, just like layer comps in Photoshop, we have the magic option of setting layer, what do they call it? Layer, I always forget. They name all these things. Layer states in Rhino. It's awesome. It's called Layer State Manager. Okay, so we can set up the pool to be exactly the kind of pool we want to be looking at. Let's say I want to do my spa. I like this one. Sweet. It's great. I'm going to type Layer States Manager. And if these are the layers I like right now, I could save it. I do want to turn the water back on. Or actually, let's leave the water off, actually. It's much better to see only the components of the pool, because it's easy in Photoshop to add water, right? You can isolate that out. So I'm going to delete this one, because it's old. I'm going to say save. Let's just call it pool, well, in this case, it's pool 1B. 1B. Okay, cool. So now I can render this out. I can jump between each of my different views and render it out. How do you render things? We go back to our standard button. This blue button here is called render, but it's valuable to go to your render settings and check some things out first. Render, create. This looks a little bit different than I'm used to. Render properties. I'm going to type flamingo. We have to get into flamingo eventually. Flamingo. Well, whatever. We can go into the render settings. If you hover over render right now, you'll see most of these buttons actually have a left button and a right button. So I could have gone render, render properties. I can also just right click on this and it brings up document properties, the same place where we did the aliases. We go to Rhino render. This is the most basic renderer of all. It's not like V-Ray or anything too fancy, but with the update of Rhino 5, it's not bad. We can start to look at a couple of special things, mainly, what's the resolution size, what are the settings, what's it going to kind of look like. So the first thing is the resolution. You can change that via, it's all set based on kind of the aspect ratio of your computer screen. I actually use viewport all the time because it's what I'm looking at. In Flamingo, it's a lot easier to kind of change it to be like 11 by 17, 150 DPI settings. We'll get into that. The DPI here is 100, but that'll work fine for us today. It is an issue if, say, you did this and you switch computers, your viewport would be different. But you can always write down 1853 by 842. If you updated those and you say lock viewport aspect ratio, you could always get back to this setting. Next thing down here is the background, solid color, gradient, or environment. And then you could select your environment. Really basic settings. Don't worry about it for the meantime. The generic settings that they have set right now are just fine for what we're doing. And by all means, if you know V-Ray or Flamingo already, feel free to incorporate those into your workflow. But as a basic thing, these will work. Hopefully your computer doesn't crash. No. Okay, thank goodness. It did not crash. I'm going to just hit render, see what happens. It's giving me an error message saying, oh, you've got a bunch of junk, or a bunch of textures that aren't showing up. I say, don't worry about it. Don't worry, be happy. And yay, that's done. Rendered it out. Say save image as, put it on my desktop. It's option 1B, view 1. I can't remember if it was P. It was probably view 2. 1B, view 2. Name it whatever you want. Hit save. Close it down. Now I can change my named view to PP1. Do the exact same thing. Say render. My computer's angry at me. But you get the picture. Go through, render out all your views with no water, with no base. Then you can go through. You can add that scale figure next to the pool, render that out by himself, by herself. And there's even some like pool people in this model, I think. And compile them all in Photoshop, add some textures to the pool, and create your layer comps, and life's all good. Add the scale figure. Well, there's some scale figures currently in here. So maybe before I turn all my other layers back on, I would go through and I would set my layer states for the other two pools. So let's say we went Baja Spa. Oh, this computer is angry. Spinning around. So scale figures, either you have them or you don't. You can bring them in as like you can just create a scale figure. You could like draw a rectangle that was 5 feet tall and say that stick is my scale figure. This model has a couple of scale figures already built into here. So there's that one. I'm just going to save this as, really important note, as I just said, save layer state manager. It already had this one highlighted. I have to dehighlight it in order to give myself a new layer state. So I'm going to call it 02, say OK. And now you can see how I can click between the two different layer states and it updates the pool. If I turn my visibility on, just turned everything back on, my computer continues to be extremely angry with me. I'm going to close some of these programs out. Let's close this Photoshop file. you will notice one, one issue is because we had them isolated via the invert selection and hide objects, it's not, the layer state actually doesn't turn anything off because the layers themselves over here were not turned off. I don't know if that really is correct. Let's try turning everything actually off and then clicking that. Come on, computer. Is anybody else having like major computer issues? It's good to know.